Two facts I will start with. The first one is I'll start where Adrian finished. The connection between any Palestinian and Palestine is even beyond your imagination. We are, as a people, very much alive, and we just witnessed our land being taken part by part out of us and being kicked out, and we were subjected till today to an ethnic cleansing operation. So this is the fact one, which goes with what Nabhan is talking about in his novel. The second fact, it's absolutely a punishment to a Palestinian to ask him to speak only for 1 hour in his favorite subject. I'm sorry. Okay, right. Why I started from the Zionism, right? I want to state first of all that we have to differentiate between Zionism and Judaism. We have no problem with Jews. To the contrary, Jews were living in the Arab world generally and in Palestine for centuries, and we have no problem at all with Jews, and it is not a religious problem, to start with that. So whatever we are commenting in this today lecture, it has nothing to do at all with the idea of Jews, right? So it's not anti-Semitic in a way or another, if anyone wants to accuse that. At the same time, I am a Semitic, so I can't be anti-Semitic against my own self. So anyway, starting from the Zionism, because Zionism is a political movement, people do have a confusion regarding Judaism and Zionism, and they sometimes think that they are like mix and match and something like essential out of Judaism. It is not. It's a political movement. It's a political party, if you like. Not necessarily every Jew is a Zionist. That's for a fact. And at the same time, we have Arabs who are Zionists. So it doesn't matter. You know, Zionist is a political movement, have their own vision. We'll talk about this vision. Now, this problem started mainly in Europe, and it's particularly a European problem, as the anti-Semitism raised in Europe, generally speaking, during the period of after the revolution in Europe, and particularly during the economic crisis, which was occurred in Europe so frequently, and they needed to, you know, export the conflict. Some big countries, they could export the conflict outside, like Britain, France. They went for colonialism. Smaller countries, they couldn't do it, so they have to focus internally to export the problem internally inside their own country, especially in East Europe, when we are talking about that. For these reasons, the anti-Semitism started to raise, which created what was known as the Jewish problem at that time in Europe. Again, this is totally and perfectly a European problem. We have nothing to do with it in the whole Middle East area. What happened later on, that Theodor Herzl, who was an Austrian journalist, and he wrote many articles asking Jews in Europe to assimilate in the society, and even if they need to deny that they are Jews, because he was an atheist anyway, he didn't care that much about religion. Also, he recommended for some of them, if they were really under pressure, to convert. He have no problem. That continued till the issue of Dreyfus came out, who was a French Jew officer in the French army. There was a Trojan in the army. He was arrested and prosecuted. Later on, they discovered that he was innocent, but because he was a Jew, he was prosecuted. That affected Herzl, who said that Jews should assimilate in Europe, to change his mind into another idea, which created to create a state for Jews and try to move or remove Jews out of Europe to end the problem of anti-Semitism. And he wrote his well-known booklet, as a matter of fact, not really a book, Judenstaat in German, which is the Jewish state, and he promoted the idea of creating a state only for the Jews and to take them out of Europe, which in this case will end the anti-Semitism against them. He changed his mind really 180 degrees, to the extent that he said that he would use the anti-Semitism to convince Jews to join his idea to remove themselves from Europe, because lots of Jews, that was his major problem. They refused the idea to leave. Why should we leave? Why should we leave? We live all our lives in, like in Europe. Why should we leave Europe because of this problem? We should do something else about it, not that kind of solving the problem in his way. Anyway, he was trying to use even anti-Semitism in order to not to ease the issue, but to the contrary, to increase the suffering of the Jews in order to force them even to move themselves to Palestine or anywhere else. The first Zionist Congress was held in 1897 in Basel, Switzerland, and they have many suggestions. Where should we make this state or take the Jews to? The first idea was Argentina, because already there is a huge immigration to Argentina already from the Jews in Europe, and they have a base, or if you like, a community in Argentina. And I said we will follow our people there. The other suggestion was Uganda, and that was also in conjunction with the British at that time, who occupied Uganda or colonized Uganda, and they offered it to them in order to, build their, which is, a great country, huge water, resources, everything is, the potential for it is quite great. But the problem with the Zionists till that moment was they could not convince enough Jews in Europe to immigrate anywhere. So some brilliant guy, I don't know who's that, he suggested Palestine, and he said, we can sell them the religious idea. Yeah, that Jews are going back to Palestine. So instead of let's immigrate, no, let's find back our own country in a way or another. And hence the idea of Palestine came out to be the target where the Jews should be immigrated and coming from Europe to Palestine and establishing their own state, which is a Jewish state in Palestine. That's why the idea, because again, Herzl himself is an atheist. He didn't care even about the religion, but he used the religion in order to go on with his political ideas. However, because of all these kind of things, we have at least this, the problem of the Jewish problem, we have at least many ideas that could be, the first facts, let me say. The first fact is the anti-Zionism is a European problem created and practiced in Europe. That's what we stated a minute ago. The second fact that solving the anti-Semitism problem by creating a Jewish state or by taking all Jews out of Palestine is by itself is a racist idea. When you are saying that I'm going to establish a Jewish state only for Jews, this is by de facto is a racist idea. So that's why we linked always Zionism with racism, starting from the very, very beginning during the Congress, the Zionist Congress in Basel. And the third fact that the Zionists demanded of a Jewish state, racist statement as a definition, as we say, it's also the wrong way to solve the problem. Instead of having Jews and Europeans fighting against racism in Europe, they chose to go out. How about all the blacks in America during the 60s and the 50s? Do we have a solution for the blacks to immigrate from America and establish their own state? No, what they did, they fought against racism in America with the Americans, even whites, in order to change the reality. That should be the real, solving of the problem. Many writers, many social writers as well, including Karl Marx, they wrote about the Jewish problem, and they suggested that we should have a front to struggle against the racism in Europe and to prevent racism of spreading in Europe in order to solve the problem and to have the Jews assimilated in the society. So these are three facts at least coming out during that period. Now, the thing is, Zionists, backed by the family well known as Rothschild family, a very, very rich family in UK, they start talking to the British, who had saw in the Zionist movement an opportunity even for themselves, thinking that creating a state in Palestine that will be in a way the back door to protect the Suez Canal for the British. And Suez Canal at that time was the major route for the British to the crown of the jewel of the crown, India. So It's very important for them to have the Suez Canal secured. They know that sooner or later they are going to leave Egypt or they are going to leave the area, so they wanted to create a body inside the area which is continuously a European body at the same time, white European body, to keep the interests of the Europeans and the British, particularly in the area, alive. So Arthur Balfour, who was at that time the foreign minister of the British government, he issued this statement known as the Balfour Declaration, which we have a big vow about it just a few months ago. It came in November, and we were asking the British, as Palestinian officially, to apologize for the Palestinian people for this promise. At that time, the British were not even occupying Palestine. So what the British did, they promised the Jews of Palestine to establish their own state, which is our own, on our own land. So they don't have the right to do it in the first place. They were not even in Palestine at that time. It's like myself saying now, okay, I'm going to promise the, the norms, for instance, a state in Pennsylvania, in America. Let them go there and do their... The people in Pennsylvania, what ground do you have to give this promise? And at the same time, who am I to give this promise? It's exactly the same situation with the British. So they gave this promise. But what's important about it, it's not all this, the rubbish of it, but the Majesty government view in favor of establishing in Palestine a national home for Jews, for Jewish people, and will use their Jewish people. And they will use their best endeavor to facilitate the achievement of this object. It became clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of the existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. Now, we are a people living in a country, and Mr. Balfour is saying, we are the non-Jews in Palestine, but you Jewish people have the right here. Here, Jewish people, he recognize them as people, but he don't recognize the people in Palestine as a people. And he called them the non-Jews in Palestine. However, we have rights, which is, in this case, religious and civil rights, yet at the same time, all the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. So Jews have the right, politically, in any other country, but the Palestinians don't have that right in their own country. So from the very beginning, you can see that this Balfour Declaration is absolutely a kind of, very prejudiced against the Palestinians. And it is also addressed to Mr. Rothschild, Lord Rothschild at that time, that, because they have this kind of a close relationship. However, after the Balfour Declaration, things started to get really very bad. However, in 1918, when the British entered Palestine and colonized it, this situation was exactly for the population of Palestine. At that time, the population of Palestine were around 700,000 Palestinians living in Palestine, historical Palestine, 700,000, a little bit less than 1 million. 11% of them were Christian, and 88% were Jews, and the rest, around 81%, were Muslims. But this community, we never thought about religions because everyone is living together. Exactly today, we have a problem with Jews because they became a state and they occupied us and all that. But to come to Palestine, and Adrian did, and to visit Palestine and to see the relationship between the Palestinian Christian and the Muslims, you can't believe it. Maybe we are the only country in the Middle East. We are celebrating the Christmas on the 24th of December, and also on the 7th of January for the Eastern and the Western, and it's an official national holiday in all of Palestine. Also, the 1st of January is also a national holiday, and the Easter. These are recognized national holidays in Palestine, though the majority are Muslims, and now Christian in Palestine are less than 2%, unfortunately. Less than 2%, but they are, living really together. And we are not, doing them a favor. We are doing ourselves a favor because we claim that Jesus Christ is a Palestinian anyway. He's from Nazareth, born in Bethlehem, buried in Jerusalem. The three cities are Palestinian cities. So by the end of the day, it's my celebration. I should celebrate, as a Muslim, celebrate Christmas because by the end of the day, this is our country and this is our, if you like, prophet. Okay. Now, after 1917, Zionists started a massive immigration to Palestine under the patronage of the British in occupation in Palestine or colonialism. They have these four objectives to achieve in Palestine. The first one was to change the demography of Palestine by bringing as much as they could of Jewish immigrants to the country and try to encounter the number of the Palestinians in Palestine. The other one is to obtain as much land as they could, either by buying or by, allocated to them by the British or whatever, try to expand their property so they have a claim. And the third one is to build an economy based on industrialization. And here is the point, because we are talking about a different kind of an economy which does not match the whole economy of the Middle East. Now we are talking about they have the money and they have the know-how because they are coming from Europe. With the help of the European, they can really create this kind of an economy which is totally different from the economy of the whole Middle East at that time. And the fourth one is to build the infrastructure for a state. Though they were just coming, but they were thinking in advance when we are going to become a state, what we do need from now, including militias. And hence in 1921, only 3 years after the Balfour Declaration and 2 years after the British occupied Palestine, the Zionist movement started their organization called Haganah, which is a military organization as a militia in order to defend the Jews and protect them in their settlements. That was the claim, but in reality, they created this kind of organization following one of the Zionist leaders at that time called Ze'ev Jabotinsky, who said, in the history, no way you come to a country, you occupy it, you take the land, and you start changing, right? Sooner or later, the indigenous people are going to fight you back. They are going to rebel against you. So it's much better for us from now to be prepared for that moment. And he was calling for creating this kind of organization, military organization. So these were the objectives of the Jewish movement at that time in Palestine. At the same time, if they are going to create a state for Jews in Palestine, this is Palestine, right? And it's a Jewish state, pure Jewish state. Where should they go with the Palestinians? It's a good question. We are going to make it all a Jewish state. So what about the Palestinians? 700,000 at that time, 1917. Later on, there will be even more. Where are we going to send them? So the British created Transjordan, which is known today as Jordan. And it's in the approximate borders with Palestine, you can see, so they can kick all the Palestinians to Jordan. And that's why today in Jordan, the overwhelming majority of the Palestinian refugees generally are in Jordan. And another fact, 75% of the total population of Jordan are Palestinians. So they imported people, and they imported order king, because the king is coming from Al-Hijaz, from Saudi Arabia today. So neither the king nor the people are from the same country, Jordan. There was nothing called Jordan apart from a river, River Jordan. So shall we go to London and say, we are creating a country called Thames or Dnieper or Danube? It's crazy. So because of the River Jordan, they call it Transjordan, and they created this state, but in order to absorb the Palestinian, refugees once they are kicked out because of establishment of a state of Israel as a Jewish state. Okay, the Palestinians resisted. We have so many revolts. We have so many also uprisings starting in 1921 and 29, El Burak incident, and then we have a revolution started in 1936 to 39 with this guy called Izzeddin al-Qassam. He was leading this supposedly thinking in a way of thoughts, because he was killed a year before the revolution started by the British. And they were fighting the British mainly because they said that there is no use of fighting the Jews. If you want to stop their project, fight the British, because they are the protectors of them. There is no project for the Jewish or the Zionists without the British. So they start fighting the British, and in 3 years, they really had achieved lots of progress. Most of the rural areas in Palestine, the villages were under the control of the revolution at that time. And the British in major cities, such as Nablus, for instance, the Qasaba, the old city of the Nablus, it were wrote on the entrances, no-go zone for the British soldiers, because it was totally, controlled by the Palestinians inside these Qasaba cities. However, because of that, the British, for the very first time, they sent a commission to Palestine to study the situation. And this commission, called Beale Commission, they came in 1937 during the revolution, and they tried to calm down the Palestinians to say, okay, But the findings of this Beale Commission came out to say and to state that this country should be partitioned for the very first time. And this was the very first time that the idea of partitioning Palestine into two states came out in 1937. This part, the yellow part, should be a Jewish state, and the green part will be a Palestinian state, and the red zone is Jerusalem to be international zone with an access to the sea. So this is the plan to the partition of Palestine. However, the two communities, the Palestinians and the Jews, they refused this plan. The Palestinians refused it because why should we share our country and give part of it just, for someone who had an idea to establish his own state here? We are not going to give part of our state or our land. Now, for the Zionist movement, also they refused it because this is not the deal. The deal to have Jewish state in Palestine, not in part of Palestine. We want the whole country. We don't accept only a small, because if we accepted now this part, then that's it. We can't get more. So now, from the very beginning, we refuse because we want all the cake. Anyway, the distribution of population in Palestine at that time started in 1918, when the British came and the first census were conducted. The Jews were 56,000, 8% of the population, and the Palestinians were 644,000, together 700,000, as I said, a total population. Now, if you notice that in the years, the steadily growing of the Palestinian because of the birth rate, which is very high among the Palestinians. So it's a steady growth of the population, while when you look at the Jewish community, you see there is jumps here, especially that we are talking about the immigration rather than the natural growth. And especially during the period during and after the Second World War with the Holocaust and all this stuff. So you have, like jumping from 174,000 to 500,000, 500,000, just like that, right? And then it became, when 1948 happened and Israel was established, number of Jews were 700,000, number of Palestinians 1.4 million. So we are talking about 33% of the population were Jews and 66% of the population were Palestinians. So in the first objective of the Zionist movement, they didn't succeed in changing the demography. They succeed, yes, to make some changes, but not to have majority of Jews living in Palestine. So that's for this objective. Now, what Adrian was talking about, the Nakba, the Palestinian Nakba, or the catastrophe, which happened in 1948. Officially, people are saying it's 1948, but I have to tell you that this is the Jewish narrative. This is the Israeli narrative, not the Palestinian narrative. The Nakba didn't start at all in 1948. It started 6 months earlier. It started exactly in November 47, when the United Nations had issued a resolution to partition Palestine into two states, creating a Jewish state and an Arab state. That was in 1947, in November 47. So I'm coming to that in a minute. So what happened after the Second World War? You can imagine that. After the Second World War, there's two facts. One is a huge sympathy with and feeling of guilt towards Jews in Europe, because of the Holocaust and the Nazis. The second one, the Zionist terrorist organization waged a war against the British troops in Palestine, demanding a declaration of Jewish state independence. So there were at that time something like 7 or 8 Jewish organizations, small military organizations, and they waged a war against the British at that time, who were ruling Palestine, demanding the independence of Israel, or having their own state. So because of these facts, the United Nations resolution came out in 1947, which stated that partition of Palestine, we will give the Jews, who are 33% of the population, 56% of the land, the green part. And we will give the Palestinians, who are 66% of the population, 42% of the land, of their own land. You can see directly that there was a huge sympathy with the Jewish community because of the war. And the Jerusalem will be 2% and its area, which is an international zone. Now, again, this partition plan were also refused by both communities. But the important fact about this partition plan, that even if we take it as is, the Jewish state, which is the green area, they will have 50% of its population Palestinian Arabs, and the other 50% Jews. So then the Jewish state will be established on 56% of the Palestinian land, but population-wise, 700,000 Jews versus 700,000 Palestinians living in the same state. So it is not a Jewish state. And in a year or two, most definitely the Palestinians will be outnumbering the Jews, so they can't claim it is a Jewish state. So what's the solution? If you want to create a Jewish state, the solution is, let's kick the Palestinian out. And that's why the ethnic cleansing started in Palestine in 1947, immediately after the resolution. The British declared officially that since you take that decision in November 47, give us 6 months just to gather our troops and to withdraw from Palestine officially. But from now, since there is a resolution, we are not responsible for what's going on on the land. So they saw lots of things and they didn't interfere. Because now their sole duty now to gather their troops and to pull out of Palestine, and they needed 6 months. In these 6 months, the Zionist movement had played on that issue. And they start, as I said, like this area, Haifa. They started with Haifa. Haifa, one of the biggest cities, and the biggest one is Jaffa, near to Tel Aviv, here somewhere. So they started kicking out the Palestinians from Haifa, and Haifa was absolutely, from the mountains of Carmel Mountains surrounding Haifa, they start bombarding the city. They blocked all the roads to the city. They forced the Palestinians, the only way to get out of Haifa is to go through the sea. By small boats, and lots of them just drown. And the British here, for humanitarian aid only, they helped one of these vessels and took refuge, all these Palestinians drowning, and put them in a British. But the British didn't even interfere. Also, the Zionist movement, and we've been telling this story for 70 years, nobody believed us. They poisoned the reservoir of water of Haifa to force people to get out of the city. And when we said, no, come on, no, Israel is the democracy in the Middle East. No way, they won't do such a thing. They are civilized, they are, white, versus us, colored. We are So 50% of the population will be Palestinians, so they start kicking out Palestinians out of the area which is supposed to be under their control. And for that matter, what happened that the ethnic cleansing ended up in getting more than 900,000 Palestinians to be expelled. Because the Jewish troops did not stop at the borders that allocated to them. They exceeded that to go even inside the part which is allocated also for the Palestinians. Like all this area was taken. This is supposed to be Gaza. Now Gaza here today is this much. And all that was taken. All this area was taken, and also they took half of Jerusalem. That is in that period of time. The 6 months, the first 6 months, they committed so many massacres. The very famous one near Jerusalem called Deir Yassin. It was committed in April 1948, even before the declaration of State of Israel in May. Israel created in the 15th of May. Even before that, 2 months before that, there was a massacre near Jerusalem, and it was a horrible massacre. I'm talking about it in a minute. Anyway, so that was the strategy of the Israelis, to kick out the Palestinians from the areas which allocated to them in accordance to the... So in November 47, the war started, and we discovered that not only that the Jewish organizations have only militias, but also they have heavy weaponry. Remember that some of them also participated in the Second World War under the British commanding and to fight against the Nazis. So they have the experience, they have weapon, they have artillery, and they have also aeroplanes, they have tanks, they have everything. And the Palestinian, nothing, nothing, totally nothing. Some rifles from the Ottoman era or during the revolution of 1936-39, which is in both cases outdated. Now that what happened. Remember the first map, this is the second map. All these green areas supposed to be part of the Palestinian state, which the Israeli also took. So they exceeded what was allocated to them in accordance to the Resolution 181, the partition of Palestine. They took more. That's why 900,000 Palestinians were kicked out from all this area. Now, officially, 750,000 of them were registered by the United Nations, and later on they created the UNRWA, the United Nations Work and Relief Agency, to help the Palestinian refugees. 750,000 were registered officially, 750,000, and the rest were talk about 100 to 150,000 Palestinians were not registered, either because we are talking about the upper and middle class Palestinians who can afford, right, to immigrate on their own. For instance, when we are talking about Edward Said, I think the name is familiar. Edward Said is a very well-known, academic and thinker. He's a refugee from Jerusalem, but his family was a rich one, right? He didn't need the UNRWA to give him, ration in the morning, some flour and some oil and milk. So he immigrated on his own. The same with many Palestinians, rich Palestinians who went to Lebanon, to Egypt, or even around the world. So they didn't need to be registered with the United Nations. Plus, some Palestinians also have relatives in the West Bank, like from Ludda and Ramallah. They are very near to each other, and there are lots of connections. So if I am in Ludda and my brother or my cousin in Ramallah, instead of going into under the trees as a refugee, I'll go to my cousin or my brother. So in this case, I won't be registered because I'm settling down. There is no need for me for ration or for the help of the UNRWA. That's why we have a difference of 150,000 in the number. But generally now the official number, which we are going all to depend on and use it, is 750,000 Palestinians became refugees officially registered by the United Nations till today. Okay, an empty slide. Okay, now the Zionists during that period, the 6 months before the war itself, they adopted many methods in kicking out the Palestinians. One is the conventional war, to attack the villages officially by tanks and by artillery and so on. The massacres and the psychological effect, and they committed many massacres, and they were intending to do so to make Palestinians be afraid when the troops come near to their village, so they will run away without even fighting, and also occupy and destroy. I'm coming to that because wherever the Jewish troops and the Zionist troops, occupied any village in all this area which they occupied, immediately after kicking all its citizens out, they will destroy it totally, bring it to the ground. Bring it to the ground. So those refugees would never think even of coming back, because coming back to what? You don't have any longer a village. As a matter of fact, 535 Palestinian villages were erased. 535 villages. Can you imagine that when you're talking about a small country like Palestine and 535 villages to be erased totally? It means that, the size and the massiveness of this kind of atrocities against the Palestinians. Well, I'm going back. Okay, so as I said, the Israeli troops, they have all the equipments. The Palestinians have nothing. This is in the conventional war. They used all their methods as with tanks, artillery, and even aeroplanes against the Palestinians. The massacres, which was a policy they adopted in order to make things easier for them, we have at least more than 22 massacres were committed only in the period of 47 till 48 May, before the establishment of Israel. But the three most major massacres were in three areas: one in Tantura, near Haifa, the second one in Deir Yassin, near Jerusalem, and the third one in Dawaime village, near Hebron. So if you look at that, here is desert. It's not much populated. You're talking about north, center, and south. That will be more enough. Even the distribution of these three massacres, it's just the aim of them. And these three were very, very brutal in order to give an example. For instance, the one which was very well documented, the only one documented, was the one in Deir Yassin, because it's very near to Jerusalem, and the Red Cross were there. Later on, and the missions of different countries visited the area, and there was the journalists who were based in Jerusalem. It was documented. It was around 250 Palestinians were killed. Not that much, but a massacre is a massacre, regardless of the number. The way they did it was very important. They got the Palestinians out, and they took men away from women and from children, and they started first with the children. And they mainly used the white weapon, like stabbing and things like that. In many cases, it was reported that women who were pregnant, they have their belly opened and they took the fetus out of their bellies. Women were raped, then they will kill the children in front of the parents or vice versa. And it was, very, very brutal one, and they aimed to make it very brutal. They kept few of the village, and they told them, okay, go now and tell the story. So people were talking about the horror of what happened, then all the villagers knew. So the next day, if the Israeli troops would come with loudspeakers saying, do you want to leave your village or your fate will be like Deir Yassin? So people start running away. Nobody wants his wife or children to, daughters to be raped or to be killed and, brutally in that way. So people start to run away. So they've used the psychology in the war because of these massacres. So these three major massacres that happened, and there is no need to go into more details. This is Tantura, near Haifa, the village. This is the Deir Yassin. And this is Dawaime. Okay. Now, on the 15th of May or 14th of May, or around that time, the British declared that we have had the last soldier pulling out of Palestine. So the last of the British soldiers leaving Palestine on the 14th of May, officially. Israel immediately, the announcement of the birth of the State of Israel on the 15th of May. They declare it. Immediately, the Arab League convened and they declared war against Israel. So here's the myth where it comes from, that the whole war started only in 1948. No one is talking about all what I was talking about, because the war not started yet, haven't started yet till that moment. That what happened. So the Arab League attacked, or they declared that they are going to attack Israel. Now, the Arab League sent troops to Palestine. Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, mainly three countries, the main countries. Then you have Syria, you have Lebanon, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, and others. So we are talking about 7 Arab countries supposedly attacking Israel. And that was the myth, because the Israelis started, to talk about it everywhere around the world. We are, a small country. We just announced ourselves in accordance to the United Nations resolution, and 7 Arab countries are coming to fight us. 7 Arab countries that are going to kill us. This is a new Holocaust. This is, I don't know. And they start all this kind of idea, to the extent that when I ask my students, usually in Palestine, and they are Palestinians, this is sometimes, that's why I'm saying, lots of information sometimes is missing. The troops of the Arabs versus the troops of the Israeli, who were a small country. Who do you think bigger? Most definitely when you are talking about, a country like Egypt and Jordan and Iraq, and most definitely the Arab troops will be bigger. But in reality, that's the reality. All Arab troops were 23,000. The Zionist troops were 93,000. And these numbers I got from the CIA site. Sorry, not in person. Okay, back to here. We are talking about the Israeli troops. We have the Haganah, the biggest one. The one was established in 1921. and became the official later on the Israeli army, because the Israeli army today called Tzava Hagana Israel, which Hagana means defense, and the Israeli army called the Israeli Defense Forces. So these are the core, major core of the Israeli army. Then we have the Balmach, Argun, Stern, Lehi, and Etzel. These were, most of them, considered as terrorist organization by the British. And as a matter of fact, Menachem Begin, one of the leaders of these organizations, became wanted by the British, and he's still wanted till 1977, when he was elected as a prime minister in Israel. Then the British dropped the wanted, statement. And also with his successor at that time, Yitzhak Shamir. Okay, so we are talking about, how big, again, the idea about why Egypt sent around 6,000 soldiers, and that was the biggest Arab army. Jordan and Iraq each around 5,000. Syria at that time, they just got their independence, and they didn't yet have the army in that such, but they sent troops with the Palestinians. They formed together what was known as the Salvation Army, our Salvation Army. Lebanon, they sent 400 soldiers, 400. But Morocco, that was something different. They sent 70 soldiers without weapon, and they told them, go and we will send your weapon later. 70. And then Israel is saying, 7 Arab countries attacked us. What do you mean? Saudis, they were there to pray for God that their bullets will be accurate. Not to send bullets, but to pray. So it was absolutely rubbish. 23,000, all of the Arab troops, including the Palestinians. Okay. Now, because of that, the Israeli, as I said, they have these 3 myths. The first one, that the war started in 1948, and they insisted on it because they don't want anyone to know about their massacres before 1948, and to blame the Palestinians. And the Arabs declared war against us. So the whole idea is that the Arab declared war, so we have to defend ourselves. So the narrative of Israel, if you now look at it, all the Israeli literature, you will find it talk about 1948 onward. They didn't talk at all about the first 6 months of that year. The second one is that the Jewish are the victims and the Arabs going to eliminate them. Again, the Holocaust, again, they are going to eliminate us, which was a myth. And many Israeli writers, they said that we know that the Israeli officers, they knew at least that we are in a very, very good condition, and we are in control, and we are not at all threatened, because there was an advantage for the Israeli troops, militarily speaking, and secondly, there was an agreement with the Arab armies. Arab armies. They were led, all of them, by the Jordanian army, or they call it the Arab army, who the chief of the staff of the Jordanian army was a British officer. So do you think the British officer would order the killing of the Jews who gave them a state in the first place? So it was just a charade, the whole thing from the Arabs. It was not real war. And the third one, that the Palestinians left Palestine on their own because they don't want to take any responsibility for the flux of the Palestinian immigrants or Palestinian refugees that they created. So no one would ask them to have them back to their country. So they said that they went on their own. We didn't even force them to go out, and Arabs asked them to leave the country. So it's just, we have nothing to do with it. They went on their own, which is absolutely not true, because there was a planned ethnic cleansing. You can refer to a book written by an Israeli Jewish writer called Ilan Pappé. The book came out, Ilan Pappé. The book came out 2006, and the book title is The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. And we are talking about a Jewish Israeli professor. After that book, he was hustled in Israel. Now he left Israel, and he's now in UK in one of the universities there. And he talked about all these details, including the Plan Dalet, which was the execution of the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. And at that time, it was the Ben Gurion, the prime minister in Israel, and he gave orders, direct orders, to eliminate the Palestinians, kick them out, destroy their villages. That was orders which was in the archive. So the Palestinians didn't live on their own. They went because they were forced to leave, like this. There were sometimes in some of the villages were literally put in trucks and they were driven out. Again, if people are running away from a war, do you think they will go in a single file like this? In a fashioned, way? They will run all over, right? If they are running really for their lives. But no, because the Israeli would be behind them, shooting to the right and to the left, to the right and to the left, to keep them in one single file directly to the borders. They were leading them out, and we have many witnesses and many testimonies about how they used to kick out a whole village towards especially those villages near to Lebanon borders or to Syria borders. They were kicked out from the area in that fashion way. Also, as I said, 900,000, 700,000 recognized by the United Nations. So the United Nations had to create later on in the 50s refugee camps for the Palestinians, and they created 58 refugee camps in the region. 9 in Gaza, 18 in West Bank, or 19 in West Bank, one of them just gone, now we have 18. In Jordan, 10 refugee camps, Syria, 9 refugee camps, and in Lebanon, 12 refugee camps. 58 refugee camps for the Palestinians around the area, and in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, which remained under the Arab control, if you like. This table from 2012, but the last number was renewed in 2016. The 10 in Jordan, how many refugees? 2 million, half a million in Syria, half a million in Lebanon. West Bank, almost 1 million or a little bit less. In Gaza, more than 1 million today, only refugees. The total was at that time 4,979,000. Today we are talking about 5,600,000. Now some smart guy might say, okay, you are now calculating the second and the third generation, not only the real refugees. Yes, absolutely. Because if I am a refugee and I have my own business and I was kicked out, so now my children are prevented of having this, and they lived life of a refugee because I was kicked out. So also they are involved, and they are, they are the inheritant as well of my property, supposedly according to the law. So they are refugees. Now we are talking about 5 million, 5.6 million refugees all over this area in the Middle East. Apart from also Egypt a little bit, and in Iraq a little bit, not much though. But anyway, this is the situation during the period of the kicking out, when they were living under the trees or in the open areas, till the United Nations came and gave them some tents, and later on built the refugee camps. Okay, so the Palestinians lost everything, and till that period, there was an attempt also to end our identity, political identity. The West Bank was annexed to Jordan, and we were prevented of saying that we are Palestinians. I tell you, personally speaking, I was 8 years old when the 1967 war happened. Now you will recognize how old I am. Okay. I was ending the first grade, and they taught us that. If you ask me at that time, where is Palestine? I will tell you, Jaffa, Haifa, Nazareth, this is Palestine. And what about Ramallah and Jerusalem and Hebron and Nablus and Jenin? I will tell you, this is Jordan. So it officially became called Jordan. The West Bank, it was annexed to Jordan by the Jordanian. And Gaza was under the military control of the Egyptian troops at that time. So there was an attempt on our identity as Palestinians. If you ask, what is the Palestinian? They will tell you it's a problem of refugees. Give them some money, give them some donations, that's the problem will be solved. Till 1967. What happened in 1967? That Israel occupied the rest of Palestine. But before that, why Israel would do that? Let me just remind you of Balfour Declaration and why the British were interested in Israel. Till today, you can't find one decade, 10 years, that Israel was not in a major war in the region. In 1948. In 1956, when Abdel Nasser and the British and the Israelis were participating in that war. Why? I don't know. The British want their Suez Canal back when Abdel Nasser nationalized it. Why the Israelis participated in that war? then in 1967, then in 1973, then in 1982, then in 2006 with Lebanon. And then we come to 2009 to 2017, 3 wars on Gaza. So you can't find 10 years without a war, a major war in the area that they did not participate in. And this is the whole idea of why Israel, anyway, was created. Okay. The reason for the war, 1967, mainly was to defeat the Arab nationalism and to defeat the Arab unity project of Abdel Nasser. Abdel Nasser became, annoying the Americans, annoying the West, especially in his ideas about Arab unity. And usually, can you imagine, just for a minute, if you have it in your mind, the Arab region, if the Arab really unity happened, it will be a major country linking, Africa, Asia with also Europe. It will be huge, full of resources, very rich, unbelievably rich and powerful. So no one is interested. That's why they have Sykes-Picot, the British and the French, to cut and create 22 Arab countries. They created Jordan, they created Syria, they created Iraq, they created Lebanon. There was no borders before. It was one Arab country, and now they make it 22 Arab countries to keep them small and without even, be able to unity, because when you appointed someone as an emir or a king on an area, definitely it's in best of his interest to continue as a king rather than nobody in an Arab unity. So it's much better for him to keep this small, even this kingdom like Qatar or Bahrain. Very, very small entities and small areas, or Kuwait, or even most of the Gulf states, apart from Saudi Arabia, because it's, the biggest one of Al-Hijaz. And so Abdel Nasser was talking about unity. We don't want this unity, so they have to go. He had to go, and not only him, but also the ideology of Arab nationalism. That's the most important thing.
Can I just say that in the novel, in Walid's novel, there's a scene in which they're listening to
Abdel Nasser's speech.
Yes, on the radio.
لا عبد الناصر.
I think Nasser, no? Yes, on the radio.
Yeah.
And it was a kind of big family.
Absolutely, Nabham, he knows that. You can hardly find a Palestinian house without Abdel Nasser picture, a huge one. When Abdel Nasser used to deliver a speech and they announce a speech, you throw, as they say, the needle, and you will hear it, because the whole region will be listening. The Jordanians were very annoyed with that. They will stop the cars and put the radio on suddenly. And if the radio was broadcasting a station called Voice of the Arabs, which was prevented in Jordan at that time, the driver will be arrested. Can you imagine that? You are not allowed to listen to this broadcast because it's broadcasting Abdel Nasser. So stupid. Anyway, so also to control the Suez Canal, because in that war, the Israeli managed to reach the Suez Canal, and also to control the water resources of Jordan River, and also the Golan Heights, the major source of water to Jordan Valley and Jordan River. So we ended up with this is Israel, as it was formed till 1967. Gaza Strip was occupied. All of Sinai Desert was occupied till Suez Canal, and they occupied the east part of Suez Canal, and also they occupied the Golan Heights from Syria, where the Mount Hermon is there, Jabal al-Sheikh, and it's the biggest mountain here that provide water to Jordan Valley and to Tiberias Lake here. So that was the reason why the Israeli did this 1967 war. Arabs were not prepared. And Abdel Nasser, when he was asked, he said, I was like threatening, but I was not intending really to fight. But the Israeli, they were preparing themselves from 1966 for that anyway. As a result, they occupied Jerusalem, and you can see Dayan, the defense minister of that time in Israel, entering Jerusalem and with the triumph and so on. After the occupation of 1967 of the West Bank, the Israeli controlled all the major, if you like, or not major, all of the infrastructure in Palestine. Roads, water, electricity, telephone lines, and access, borders, everything was under the control of the Israeli. Palestinians were not allowed to have access to all of these vital, if you like, from the Israeli point of view, for security reasons, including the water. I don't want to go into details because time is just running, but you can imagine, like today, if you visit Palestine, you will be seeing this phenomena that all the buildings and houses in Palestine, the top roofs, you have all these reservoirs, small, black, ugly water tanks all over the area. Even if you look a picture in Google for any Palestinian city, immediately you will notice that in all buildings you have these, water tanks on top. Because in a city like Ramallah, which is more or less, if we accept Jerusalem, the biggest city now administratively and politically as the capital considered, we have the water only 3 days a week. 3 days a week, and 4 days we don't have water at all. That's why we have these tanks, to preserve water for the 4 days of no water. The problem is that the Israelis are taking this water from our land, from the water basins in the West Bank, one huge one near Salfit in the north of Palestine, and the other one near Hebron in the south, and both reservoirs are controlled by the Israelis. Palestinians are not allowed at all to dig wells. The Israelis are allowed. They sell us our own water. Okay, we accepted even that, but the not fair issue here that they give the settlers free, unlimited access to the water. They give the Palestinian a very small amount, as I told you, only 2 or 3 days a week, and sometimes in some areas only 1 day a week. According to the agreement of Oslo, Palestinians should have, Israeli have 71% of the water, and Palestinians only have 17% of the water. This is supposed to be according to Oslo. But today, in reality, since there is no peace talks anymore and there is no Oslo in the first place, the Israelis now are having 87% versus 13%. It means in reality that the Palestinian consumption of water is 16 liters a day. The Israeli consumption is 67 liters a day. Both are our water, but the settlers have free access, we don't. So they are controlling the water in this, and we are having real problems. The other day I was telling Adarian, we visited in Jordan Valley some of the villages which all of them have an eviction, and their houses, all of their houses and tents and whatever, supposed to be demolished by the Israeli orders. They denied access to water totally. Because they want them to get out. So they have to buy the water from another city by tankers. They bring it, and that will be very, very expensive. And the guy was telling us, really, he makes everyone was listening like wanted to cry. He said that the problem is at night. We hear our water in the pipe which goes under our village, and we hear it in the night, the voice of the, and we can't have access to that water. It's our water from our area, and they have these huge pipes under the ground, where's the village on top, and we hear the water, but we don't have an access to it. You can imagine how to what extent these people are really, Then they also built the wall, the separation wall. We have no problem with the wall, if it is on the borders, in accordance to the two-state solution, anyway, suggested at some stage by the Palestinians, that Palestinians will have West Bank and Gaza Strip as a one state, and Israel will continue to exist as it is. But the problem is that this wall is not on the borders between 1967 and 48. It is going inside the West Bank, taking parts of the West Bank also, and annex it, in this case, to Israel. So when we are talking about what left over of the war is 22% of historical Palestine after 1948, and Israel was established on 78% of historical Palestine. Now the 22%, the Israelis are taking parts of it as well. So they are leaving us with nowhere. So the wall, and I'm not talking about a fence. The Israeli call it fence. And whenever they are saying fence, we were talking about that yesterday, about the words and how it's used in a cultural, fence. Then it means like small, nice wooden, white, between two gardens. This is the fence. So this is the fence the Israelis are putting between their neighbors. It's 12 meters high. So huge. And separating most of the West Bank. Here you can see the red line is where's the fence is going. You can see here it's going inside. This is Salfit area because they want to take all this area inside. And we have here also a city called Kalkilie. The whole city is surrounded by this wall, the whole city. And then in the end, of the wall surrounding, they have a gate. So Israel soldier, one soldier can come and close the gate and he will look a whole city inside. Can you imagine that? And otherwise you have a wall surrounding which is 12 meters high. Unbelievable. And also in Jerusalem area, you can see that the wall is going inside, right? They didn't even started yet with the wall supposed to be here in the Jordan Valley, but now because they want to claim all this area to take it over from the Palestinians. So you can see the wall and its effects on the Palestinians. It's unbelievable. This is how cynically we look at the wall, especially during the Christmas period. Yeah, which is totally true, because the one inside Bethlehem, it's separating Bethlehem from Jerusalem. And every year we're supposed to have the Christmas Mass that they go from the Nativity Church in Bethlehem to Jerusalem, to the church in Jerusalem. And usually this is a march of, annual march. Now with the wall, that's it. So it's very much realistic, very much true. Okay, the policy of arresting Palestinians, even the arresting children. If you Google that, you will see that the Israeli even arresting children of 7 and 6 years old sometimes, for a few hours though. But officially by law, they can arrest officially children of 12 years old. 12 years old, and they have categorized the West Bank. Hence, in Israel, the law says that under 18 years old is a child. Anyone under 18 years old is a child. Now, in the West Bank, it's different law. 12 to 14, 14 to 16, 16 to 18. 16 to 18, he's an adult, fully adult. Now, 14 to 16, he can be put into trial. And I'm talking about not a civil trial here. All Palestinians are subjected to military trials. So we are prosecuted under military officer. He's the judge. So if I'm resisting the occupation, and he's representing the occupation, so the judge is my enemy. So no way he can be, impartial. No way he's going to be just in any way. Okay, right. Over the period of 1967 till today, more than 800,000 Palestinians were arrested. That is, in fact, 25% of the total population of the Palestinians. That's why we say this problem is a huge problem. And maybe we are the only country in the region who have a ministry called Ministry of Prisoners and Detainees. Because, the amount of people who left the prison, and you have to rehabilitate them and try to find jobs for them. And now the Israelis are following us with Trump, saying that the Palestinian Authority is paying those prisoners and their families allowances, and they should stop paying them. Okay, you have this huge number of people. We have to rehabilitate them. We have to pay for their tuition fees. They paid their duty to the country by being in prison for 5, 6, 10, 15. We have people today more than 36 years in prison already, because the life sentence is not defined in Israel as 25 or 30. It's open. So people are spending now 36 years in prison, and they are still going on. If you consider that 52% of the population in Palestine are under 18 years old, we are a very young society. It means that if we put those aside, it means that basically 50% of all adults in Palestine were arrested. The 25% here will be doubled. If we take half the population are children, then these are the adults. We are talking about 50% of the population. Can you imagine 50% of your population? Think of it in your area or your country or your town, if 50% of that area were in prison. Can you imagine that? It's a shocking number. Because the Israelis have everyone is under arrest. But also, in this arrest, they use the torture, which is Israel is the only country legalized that in 1999 by high court order. Well, mind you, they said that we allow the interrogator to apply what they call it, mild pressure on the Palestinian detainees to get information. Can anyone please identify what mild pressure means? Come on. mild pressure. Torture, it means torture. And believe me, from my own experience, because also I work with the Palestinian prisoners organizations and campaigns for the Palestinian prisoners, what we know and what we saw with our own eyes that make the torture in Palestine, making the torture of Abu Ghraib of Iraq is a mere joke in comparison. Believe me. Okay, children arrest, we talked about that, and administrative arrest, and this is the worst. Now, all the administrative arrest detainees are in strike, and they are thinking of going next week into a hunger strike. What administrative arrest? If the Israeli, they suspect that you might done something, but they have no proof, right? Yet they can still arrest you under administrative arrest. They arrest you for 6 months, renewable, and they will continue to renew it. And every time you will appear in front of the judge, and the secret services, the Israeli secret services, they say, okay, judge, we have a secret file. Neither the judge nor your lawyer allowed to see that secret file. So the judge, when they say secret file, he had to renew your arrest again, and so on and so on. And we have people who spend more than 8 years in a row under administrative arrest. No charges, no trial, no even interrogation. So they can arrest anyone. Today, as we speak, we have more than 500 Palestinians who are under administrative arrest. We have 6,500 Palestinians in Israeli prisons, including 350 children, including also 56 women in Israeli prisons. And the unjust military trial, we talked about that. As I told you, the judge is your enemy, so definitely there will be no just at all. Now, settlements is definitely the nightmare of all of the Middle East today as far as the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is concerned. Since 1995 Oslo Agreement, the Israelis supposed to stop activities in the settlements. Now, what the Israeli do? Against the international law, especially the Geneva Convention, they are bringing their own people into the occupied territories, which is in the 1967 borders, and they create settlements inside Palestine, inside the land which is supposed to be Palestine. So I'm negotiating with you to give me this, right, by the end of the negotiation. And yet, while we are negotiating, you are still cutting parts of it. While we are negotiating, and that's exactly the situation with the settlements. So they are continuing to build settlements on the land which is supposed to give it to us to be our own country. So this is a big problem, the settlements. And when Oslo happened, there was 150,000 settlers in the West Bank, including Jerusalem. Today, we are talking about 700,000 settlers in the West Bank, and I think it's no way that they are going to, take them out. Some settlements more than 40 years old. Okay, so now, that what remained of the West Bank, which is supposed to be, according to Oslo Agreement, part of the Palestinian state, or the major part of the Palestinian state. You can see the major cities are cut off between areas, and these areas, the yellow and the red dots, are the settlements. They are not that much in comparison to the population, the Palestinian population, but they are in a way that it would cut the major areas, north, central, and south of Palestine from each other, and there will be no continuity between the land of the Palestinian land. That's because of the reality of these settlements. This is Jerusalem, and you can see the density of the settlements around Jerusalem. This is the Jordan Valley. It's the most fertile land in Palestine, the richest land in Palestine, and they are controlling all the area, you can see. Rarely you can find Palestinian villages. Look at the Palestinian villages or Palestinian community, very small community. They'll kick them out all the time. The Dead Sea part, our Dead Sea part, we are not allowed even to approach it. They consider it as a security zone. If we want to visit the Dead Sea, we have to go through Israeli settlements like this one here and another one here, and through them we can have access to the shore after we pay an entrance fee, which is a hefty one, and then to enjoy our own part of the sea, the Dead Sea, for an hour or two. It's unbelievable, denying us all these kind of things. And in addition to that, as we said, the wall. So this creating a new reality. This, why I have many new realities, forget about that. That is, according to Oslo Agreement, they have make a distribution of areas supposed to be A, B, and C zones. According to Oslo Agreement, the Israeli every once in a while should transfer land from C to B and from B to A. Now, A is supposed to be totally under the total jurisdiction of the Palestinian Authority in every sense. B area, the Palestinians are controlling the people, but not the security and the water. So it's like in conjunction between both. C area is still totally under the occupation. So if I want to build a house, if I'm in C area, I have to apply for the Israeli authorities, the military authority in Israel to build a house. If I'm in B or in A, I apply to the Palestinian Authority. So C area is around, and you can see also the distribution is also making it very, very hard to connect. Also, this area, the pink area, is the area that is annexed by Israel officially to Israel. Latron villages here, this area near Jerusalem, and this part of Jerusalem also, the East Jerusalem. That's why we say East Jerusalem, because East Jerusalem was occupied in 1967, and it's considered as an occupied territory, but the Israeli annexed it officially in 1968. And now Trump wants to move the embassy to Jerusalem. No one around the world recognizes the authority of Israel over an occupied territory, apart from Israel and the orange man in America. And mind you, Micronesia. What is that? I don't know. Okay, Area A is only 18% of the West Bank, with 36% of the population. Area B, 22% of the West Bank, with 60% of the population. So we're talking about 96% population under the Palestinian control as population, not as land, as population. C area, 60% of the West Bank, with only 4% of the population. That's why now Israel is going to annex C area, this area, not this one. Oh, this one, the pink one, not very pink, little pink. This is C area, 60% of the West Bank. A area is 18, the dark green, and the light green is B area. So you can see now that Palestinians actually do have only something like between 9 to 12% of their historical Palestine instead of anything else. This is in 1947 when the resolution came out. Jewish community owned only 6% of the Palestinian land. Most of it from absentee landlords outside Palestine, in Lebanon and in Syria, and part from the British mandate on Palestine. They gave them and allocate land to them, and very few percent, small percent from Palestinians. Only 6%, so they didn't succeed, as a matter of fact, in buying land as much in 1948. But this is the reality of 1947 resolution plan to partition Palestine. This is what happened after the war from 1949 to 67. This is what we left with today. These small spots and Gaza. That's why they are continue to say, go and make your state in Gaza. And these spots only. So we are now controlling only 9% here of all of historical Palestine. So it's you can see that the ethnic cleansing, which started officially in 1948 during the war and 1947, as a matter of fact, it didn't stop. It's going on till today, especially also in Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, they didn't consider the people who are living in Jerusalem, especially East Jerusalem, as citizens. They consider them as, you know, like a visitor. And if you go to study outside the country for 7 years, you will lose your identity as a Jerusalemite. You lose your residency. If you don't pay taxes, you will lose your residency. If they prove that you have another house, let's say in Ramallah, or you live in Ramallah, you will lose your residency. So they are making all these kind of things to kick the Palestinians out of Jerusalem. They have this new plan called 2020. By the year 2020, they want in East Jerusalem to have the Palestinians and the Jewish community bigger than the Palestinians. So far in East Jerusalem, the Palestinians are more. They want to change that by 2020, and that's why they kick the Palestinians and they make new settlements all the time inside the international community did not recognize settlements, and they consider it as a war crime, as a matter of fact. And we have also resolutions by the court justice, and many also United Nations resolutions condemning the settlements and consider it as an illegal. But the Israelis, they don't care as far as they have America, protecting them. And if it comes to a United Nations resolution, definitely the Americans are going to use the veto for the sake of the Israeli. So far, America used the veto 46 times just to protect Israel, which is 75% of the total vetoes that America used. Last but not least, there is another slide. Where is it? It's gone. That would put us in front of a question after all that. Is the two-state solution still valid or not? Maybe 10, 15 years ago, yeah, it might. But now with the new reality, with 700,000 settlers and the Israeli inside the West Bank, and the Israeli tendency more and more towards the right-wing settlers, I don't think at all that there will be a leader in Israel at any time who's going to say that I'm going to withdraw all settlers from the West Bank. Definitely he will be killed next day by the settlers. No Israeli leader is going to say, okay, yes, East Jerusalem is a Palestinian land because it's occupied 1967. No way. He will be killed next day by the Israeli fanatics. No Israeli is going to say, okay, we would even think, not even allow, think about the refugees. Though the refugees, we have a resolution 194 by the United Nations stating that Palestinian refugees should go back to their original place in Palestine, which was occupied in 1948, and also to be compensated for those who had their property either damaged or controlled by the Israeli troops. It's unbelievable. So I don't think that the two-state solution, which came out of Oslo, is still valid today. And we need to think differently. And that's why we now in Palestine, let me say, as an academics in Birzeit University, for instance, we do support the BDS, especially the part about the boycotting of the Israeli academics. We are not at all dealing with Israeli academics. We refuse to, even when we are invited to a conference and there is an Israeli lecturer, we don't attend because we are boycotting Israel. And we are calling all academics around the world, as a matter of fact, to boycott, because the academia in Israel is part of the occupation. They supported the occupation. We didn't hear any academics in Israel say that occupation is illegal or occupation is unethical. They don't. To the contrary, they provide research after research to support the Israeli army in controlling the Palestinians. So part of the BDS is to boycott, divest, and sanctions against Israel is the only way to make the Israeli think twice. This does not need the approval of the Americans, or if you like, the protection of America. If I choose not to buy the Israeli products, no one can prevent me. But maybe we can't go to the United Nations and have a resolution because the American will prevent us. But you can't prevent you as persons of doing that. So our solution, we think that since the two-state solution is absolutely now became, as we call it, two-state illusion, I think we are heading towards a one-state. One-state solution for all people who are living in Palestine, Israel, whatever. We can name it whatever. I tell you what, Gaddafi once he said, okay, live together and call it Isratin. So like mixing between Israel and Palestine. Okay, I don't care about the name, right? But to have an equal rights for everyone, because now we are heading towards an apartheid in Palestine. This year, 2018, in March this year, there was an announcement that the number of Palestinians in historical Palestine is matching Jews in historical Palestine, inside, let alone those who are outside. I'm talking about in historical Palestine. West Bank, Gaza Strip, Jerusalem, and the Palestinians who remained inside Israel after 1948. Now we are more than the Jewish community in Israel. So from now on, we are now entering this zone of apartheid as well. minority and majority. We are the majority ruled by minority. We are asking for one state, and this one state should be equal for all its citizens, secular, democratic state for everyone. I'm quite sure that lots of the Israeli racists are going to leave Israel because most of them, they have both passports, lots of different nationalities. They are not going to stay, they will leave. We will end up with those Jews who came from Arab states or Jews who were born in Israel itself, and then in this case we can live together and we can go back to one Palestine again, because I think because of the Israeli measures, they make us believe and they pushed us to that this country, Palestine, are not going to be partitioned, or can't be partitioned apparently, can't be two states. It's only one state for all its citizens. That's the whole idea. Thank you very much for your attention. And